I want to shift gears a little bit to NVIDIA. We're covering from earlier losses, but a report on CNBC.com, China says that NVIDIA violated anti-monopoly law after a preliminary probe. It's almost impossible to talk about AI without talking about NVIDIA. I can't believe we made it 13 minutes in without talking about it. But Brent, I'm going to toss this ball up to you. I know you're an owner there. Any concern about what's going on between these headlines? Again, more headlines about the U.S. and China's relationship and policy, rules, regulations. Does this scare you at all, or is this you sit and you hold on NVIDIA?
No, I mean, I think the timing is suspect. Obviously, they're having very big conversations around TikTok and other trade agreements. And so I think that this is a way for China to, in a very subtle way, just to say, hey, wait a minute, we're a big market. And so I would just totally dismiss it. I am totally dismissing it.
Yeah, this is surrounding the Mellanox acquisition in 2020, and what's unclear here is what's the recourse. Okay, we feel as though there was a potential antitrust violation, but what is the recourse going to be? So I think Bryn is correct in kind of identifying this probably more than anything else is a negotiating tactic as the president is set to meet with President Xi later in the week.
That's all it is. It's just negotiation.
Okay.
NVIDIA right now.
So no real risk.
Not to this. No, not to this, nor to the semis where they say, the other semis where they say, oh, they're dumping. It's just, it's nothing. Just move on. Nothing to see here.
Okay, so the headlines, we shouldn't get scared by the headlines. Shannon, you agree?
I mean, I don't think these specific headlines, but I think that what investors and the watchers of the show should understand is that semis are going to be in the narrative between China and the U.S. for the foreseeable future.
Quite a negotiating chip, pun intended,
yes,
right?
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, there is a lot of concern about national security, our access to, our sharing of that technology. And so I think this is part of really what is likely to continue to be an AI arms race between China and the U.S. And so despite the fact that I don't think these headlines are necessarily disruptive, if you own any of these companies, it's something that you should be braced for, particularly as you're looking at semis versus software and some of the negotiations that are going to come out of the talks between China and the U.S. over the next several months.
Before we move on from chips, Joe, you own Broadcom, and it was initiated to outperform $420 price target at Macquarie. And the firm is talking about expecting surging demand for the ASIC to outpace GPU growth. Do you like this call? I assume you do if you're bullish on the name.
Absolutely. Staggering quarter last week. I'm sorry, staggering quarter several weeks ago from Broadcom. The real staggering quarter last week was from Oracle. But they are proving themselves. Now, look, if you're going to focus on valuation's getting stretched in Broadcom. Steve, I know you've spoken about that at length. But if you're also talking about the dominance of market share, then you identify NVIDIA and you identify Broadcom as the two names that are so critically vital right now in this AI infrastructure build-out and the delivery of chips, the ability to stack chips. That's where, to connect the chips together, that's where Broadcom is valuable.
Well, China's market regulator announced this morning that NVIDIA violated anti-monopoly law. But this is more than just about antitrust. It's also about leverage. Beijing launched this probe in December, just 1 week after Washington unveiled tougher chip export controls, and conveniently announced the, quote, violation today as U.S.-China trade negotiators just finished meeting in Madrid this weekend today. The alleged breach involves NVIDIA's 2020 Mellanox acquisition, which was a deal China approved with conditions 5 years ago. So why act now? Well, perhaps posturing to gain negotiating power plays a role. NVIDIA released a statement this afternoon saying that they, quote, comply with the law in all respects. But shares are slightly in the red. Last I checked, about 0.3% lower. But the selling pressure really extends across semiconductors. And why is that? Because China also launched an anti-dumping probe Saturday targeting U.S. analog chip suppliers, hitting companies like Texas Instruments, which you can see is down over 3% today. But for NVIDIA investors, the bigger worry is that revenue upside really hinges partly on China demand. And the company is caught in this tug of war where the U.S. wants China to be dependent on American AI compute, while China is pushing its domestic companies to avoid U.S. tech at all costs. But the immediate financial impact may be limited, which is why you're not seeing that big of a hit to the stock. NVIDIA already reported no H20 sales to China-based customers in the second quarter, saying those sales hadn't reached the country yet. And this limits NVIDIA's upside potential, though. That's the big thing. It limits the upside potential on revenues and earnings in the near future if China comes back into the game or never returns because of this drama between both countries. Guys?
NVIDIA now getting caught a little bit in the middle. Chinese regulators claiming that NVIDIA violated one of its antitrust laws with its 2020 deal to buy a company called Mellanox. Now, NVIDIA issuing a response to this, saying, quote, "We comply with the law in all respects and denying any wrongdoing." NVIDIA stock initially fell on the news. It's flat now, literally exactly unchanged right now. For more on what this may all mean or not mean, let's bring in Bernstein senior analyst Stacy Rasgon. Stacy, kind of hit with an antitrust accusation, and the stock market snores.
Well, you got to remember, they're not selling anything in China right now.
Not yet.
So
they want to.
They want to. And actually, the reason they're not selling right now, it is because of the China side. The U.S. seems to be getting a little more flexible on that. It's sort of unfortunate because, supposedly the antitrust piece that they violated was that they weren't selling. They had promised post-Mellanox to make sure they kept selling into China, and they haven't been. Of course, it's not their choice. It was on the U.S. side in that case. Was not allowing them to sell. So they're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, I guess. But to be honest, I don't know how serious this really is. I mean, they're in trade talks right now, as you were talking about. This feels to me just like one more like chess piece on the chessboard being moved. I don't know how serious it actually is.
Okay, so let's use your analogy. Is it an analogy or metaphor? I can never remember. Let's use that example. How about that, Stacy? Fail English. All right, here's the thing. In chess, there is a goal. That goal is checkmate, right? Is to beat the other. So if this is a chess piece, as you say, what is the goal?
Yeah, again, this is a whole other thing because I don't know how much our administration is playing chess or checkers or whatever. So I don't know. At the end of the day, I mean, look, NVIDIA wants to sell into China. That's correct. And I'll be honest, I think there's a lot of demand in China for NVIDIA's parts. So I actually think the Chinese customers would like NVIDIA to be able to sell into China. China right now is flexing everything that they can to bring to bear around some of these trade talks. This is one lever that they may have. They did some other things today too. They launched an anti-dumping investigation into the analog space. So again, wherever they can at least in some sense try to influence some of the outcome and apply at least a little bit of pressure, they're doing everything they can. I think part of the issue, at least in semiconductors, is that there's not a lot that they can do. Like they don't really have, because of some of the things that have occurred, they don't really have a leadership position in most of these areas in semis. So wherever they can, I mean, they'll try to grab it, but there's not a ton that they can do at this point.
Yes.
So we'll see what happens. I don't exactly know what the goals are on either side at this point.
We'll see. And I'm sure there's I tried the Simpson quote from Ralph Wiggum. Maybe there's something related to NVIDIA in China. Who knows? But Stacy, quickly, what is the next market-moving event for NVIDIA stock? What's the next major thing that you are following?
Yeah, I mean, so you've got earnings and everything else. I mean, they just reported earnings not that long ago. What we're really looking for, at least for this year, I guess is two things. One is the magnitude and trajectory of their rack shipments as they ramp their Blackwell Ultra, their GB300 parts into the end of the year next year. Look, we're also waiting to see if some of these licensing and other issues around their ability to do business in China do ease, because again, they have zeroed it out from their numbers. So anything they get from China in the near to medium term is upside. And I guess as you go forward, they've got their GTC event, which will be in March of next year. It's not that long, 6 months from now, where we'll probably get a lot more color on their next generation product, which is called Rubin, which is supposed to ramp in the second half of next year. So we'll probably learn a lot about that in the first half of 2026 when they have that event.
God, we're already talking about 2026.
Awful.
We're almost there.
What do you mean we're almost there? Summer 2025 is not even over. Technically,
September.
Oh my goodness, time, as they say, is flying. Stacey?
The AI volleyball game continues to see huge multi-billion-dollar spikes going back and forth, back and forth. NVIDIA serving the latest money ball right into CoreWeave's hands in the form of a multi-year promise to pay CoreWeave $6.3 billion for any unsold cloud computing capacity it has. Yeah, leftovers. Anything you don't have, we will buy, says NVIDIA. The previously undisclosed deal was actually struck more than 2 years ago. CoreWeave shares spiking 7%. We're about to tell you why NVIDIA's had a bit of a struggle at this hour and throughout the session, staying in the green. In a rather robotic announcement by the Chinese government, China's State Administration for Market Regulation said today that an initial inquiry has found NVIDIA violated Beijing's anti-monopoly laws. That's it. No additional information. That's all they said. It could be a setback for CEO Jensen Huang, seen here in July, meeting reporters in Beijing, playing the role of diplomat, signing autographs right after the U.S. approved the resumption of sales for his H20 AI chips to China. But now China suddenly is all, oh, wait, you guys are anti-monopolistic. And while NVIDIA tells FBN it complies with the law in all respects and will cooperate with all governments regarding competition and export laws, China's timing of this announcement and accusation is a bit of an eyebrow raiser, considering Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, currently in Madrid, leading the U.S. trade delegation in a new round of trade talks with the Chinese.
Liz, NVIDIA, Beijing says the company violated the Chinese government's conditional approval of its 2020 acquisition of Mellanox Technologies. China didn't announce a punishment, but it says it will keep investigating. These accusations now casting doubt as to whether NVIDIA will be able to sell its H20 chips to China, which you mentioned the Trump administration approved back in July. Now we don't know if China even wants those exports, so the plot thickens. Liz?
Yeah, so again, and AMD kind of got the same deal. They were allowed to sell, at least get the licenses to sell their chips. AMD is moving higher by 1.6%.
As time has gone on, we've learned more about where we're at in the AI adoption cycle. And I know there's been some questions about that, particularly relative to NVIDIA and whether we're at peak or not. I don't think that we are. Unfortunately, NVIDIA is caught up in this geopolitical mess between the U.S. and China. But I do think that their technology will prevail. They still have the best technology out there, and there still is a ton of demand, including from areas definitely outside of the U.S. with sovereign nations and others that are still building out their infrastructure. So I still think there's a great growth story there.
And yet people are so quick to give up on these stocks, as if their biggest and best days truly are behind them. Take NVIDIA. This morning I get up, I was a little cranky. I don't know why the Eagles won yesterday. I fire up the machine and I read that there's a Chinese entity that says NVIDIA violated an antitrust law. The stock's down 3, then 4, then 5. I get fed up and I take the X. Quote, usual NVIDIA shareholder freak out on suboptimal China news. Join the club and stop panicking, will you? End quote. That was a reference to my own it, don't trade it policy on the stock of NVIDIA. It doesn't stop, though. The stock just keeps going lower, even as we discovered this inquiry is about something from NVIDIA's acquisition of Mellanox Technologies, a division that gave NVIDIA exposure to high-performance network equipment and not core semiconductor business. That was 5 years ago, and the Chinese okayed it, and yet it caused pandemonium. But what happens with stocks like this? You know, by 11:50, the stock's in the black. You would have caught 6 points if you bought at the low. More important, though, is that NVIDIA could bounce right back, even if the stock ultimately closed slightly in the red. That's a sign, once again, that so many are skittish. NVIDIA's shareholder base is full of people who probably shouldn't own the stock in the first place, because the moment they hear about a Chinese antitrust investigation, they think they've overstayed their welcome and they sell. That's always how it has been with NVIDIA. Always. People who don't know what the company does figure there's no future because they don't even know the past.
I hope you're all doing well today. Today we learned that NVIDIA is being accused of breaching an anti-monopoly law in China. Let me be clear in saying that I think this is simply more of the back and forth trade dispute between the two governments, and I don't view this as a major problem for NVIDIA. NVIDIA's business is accelerating even without any H20 sales in China. Any China revenue would be additional upside to what is already a solid long-term setup in my opinion. The reality is that Chinese tech firms still want access to NVIDIA chips, and I think there's a high likelihood that this situation will eventually be resolved. As long as NVIDIA is allowed to sell a better chip in China than the domestic alternatives, there will continue to be demand. Now, the question is whether the chips will be allowed into China or not. But again, I think this whole situation will likely eventually be worked out. This week, we're expecting Jensen to travel with the president on a state visit to the UK, where NVIDIA and OpenAI are expected to announce large AI investments in the UK. Since Jensen will be spending time with the president, I wonder if we will get any update on the United States allowing a Blackwell chip to be sold in China. I also wonder if Chinese regulators' opposition to the H20 is an attempt to get the United States to allow a better chip into China. I don't don't know. But regardless of that, there is still demand in China, and NVIDIA's business is accelerating even without China H20 sales. Now I want to talk about the $6.3 billion NVIDIA CoreWeave deal that was announced today. Under the deal, NVIDIA will purchase any compute capacity that CoreWeave does not sell to customers. And this deal is supposed to continue through April 13th of 2032. Last week, the information reported that NVIDIA is stepping back from their cloud efforts to compete with hyperscalers and are instead using that capacity for their own internal workloads at NVIDIA. I am hesitant to believe what the information reports having to do with NVIDIA rumors. But based on this CoreWeave deal, it does appear that NVIDIA wants access to a large amount of compute capacity. I've seen some people online assuming that this is a Ponzi type of situation. And I can understand why someone might think that when they hear that NVIDIA sells the hardware and then rents that capacity back from CoreWeave. But we need to be clear about what's actually happening here. Let me lay it all out very simply. NVIDIA designs the chips and systems. CoreWeave then purchases that hardware and outfits large-scale data centers. CoreWeave then leases that compute capacity to customers. So far, so good. Most people don't have a problem with what I've described so far. The next part is the part that some people have a problem with, and that is NVIDIA leasing some of that compute capacity from CoreWeave. But it's actually not a problem when you understand what's really happening here. NVIDIA uses that capacity for their own internal workloads. NVIDIA is constantly innovating and training their own AI models, and they need a lot of compute capacity to do it. And don't miss this. It is better for NVIDIA to lease capacity from companies like CoreWeave rather than building entire data centers themselves. Jensen has said in the past that a 1 gigawatt data center easily costs somewhere in the range of $50 to $60 billion to build. And so by leasing capacity from other companies rather than building the entire data center, NVIDIA is taking on much less risk. It's not like NVIDIA is funneling money to a shell company simply for that company to then buy more product. Rather, NVIDIA is leasing capacity from CoreWeave to support NVIDIA's own internal workloads. This way, NVIDIA doesn't have to take on the risk of spending tens of billions of dollars to build out an entire data center in order to access the compute they need. That's it. When you consider it from that perspective, you realize it's not as bad as it may seem to be at first glance. Looking ahead, we have NVIDIA GTC in Washington, D.C. with a keynote from Jensen Huang on October 28th. Jensen told us on the NVIDIA earnings call that he is anxious to share more details about Rubin with us at GTC. I'm really interested to learn more about NVIDIA's progress in quantum computing, and I hope we'll get an update on that from Jensen during his keynote on October 28th. NVIDIA is already working with just about everyone in the quantum industry on NVIDIA's CUDA-Q platform. And Jensen said earlier this year that the next generation supercomputers will have a QPU assigned with QPUs connected to GPUs. NVIDIA is establishing themselves as the underlying infrastructure of both quantum computing and physical AI. Speaking of physical AI, over 2 million developers are already building on the NVIDIA robotics stack. With Omniverse and NVIDIA AGX, NVIDIA is establishing themselves as the foundation for the oncoming wave of physical AI, which will likely be the biggest wave of AI yet. I am completely serious when I say that I think NVIDIA's robotics business may eventually be larger than their current data center business. These massive growth opportunities of physical AI, quantum computing, combined with sovereign AI, enterprise AI, and AI native startups, make me even more confident in saying that I think NVIDIA's long-term growth is being substantially underestimated by most analysts. Zooming into the medium term, I really like the setup for NVIDIA through the remainder of this year and into 2026, as we should have a convergence of multiple positive factors. We should see revenue from certain large-scale sovereign AI deals start to show up either as revenue or revenue guidance on NVIDIA's Q3 or Q4 reports. Blackwell Ultra is ramping very quickly right now, and I'm expecting a surge in compute demand fueled by agentic AI that extends well into 2026. Jensen seems to agree with this, as he said on the earnings call that he expects reasoning agentic AI to be a major growth driver in 2026. As for production ramps, Blackwell Ultra is ramping strong, as I mentioned. Rubin is on track to launch in 2026. Then we're expecting Rubin CPX at the end of 2026, then Rubin Ultra in 2027, and Feynman later on in 2028. We have a clear data center product roadmap extending into 2028. Jensen is expecting $3 to $4 trillion in global AI factory buildout between now and 2030, meaning he's expecting growing AI demand and an expanding total addressable market. And NVIDIA has multiple massive growth opportunities ahead that they are really just starting to capitalize on. For all of these reasons and more, I continue to be bullish on the long-term future of NVIDIA, and I think this company will be worth substantially more in future years than it is today. At least that's my view of the situation. Remember to stay calm in this market. Remember to maintain a long-term perspective, and do not make any hasty or irrational decisions. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.